But that is what all marketing does. And I can give you many examples. There's a whole chapter in the book, by the way, on the whole ethics of this thing. But simply speaking, that we've also observed that, for example, when you go to a store, if they play fast music, you move faster through the store. If they play slower music, you move slower through the store at a more relaxed pace. So, what happens is that when you go into a grocery store, you want to have slower, more relaxed music piping in because you don't want people rushing through your store, right? So you want people to browse and look at things. And if they browse more, they buy more. Now you might say, wait a minute, you're manipulating me just by playing the slower music. And that is true. Marketers are doing that. But, in that scenario, it's kind of harmless. And the same opposite thing happens, by the way.
Harmless, I don't know if to my wallet.
Yes. So I think that's the thing. So I think at the same time, so there are some tests that marketers should have around what is ethical and what's not ethical. And I do talk about some of those tests in the book, specifically, things like, is this, are you doing something to others which you wouldn't want to do to yourself? That is one of the 3 tests that is out there. So you need to think about those things. And I think that is why asking that question is the first step for marketers to be conscious of what their actions are having, how their actions are having an impact on other people. And that in itself is a great beginning.
Well, after that, Sandeep, I hand it to you. I think we're excited to learn about marketing and how we can use these tools to our advantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you see any questions from the audience, please throw those in, since I'm looking at a more limited portion of my screen. But yes, if there are questions, you're welcome to take them.
Go ahead, Sandeep. I turn it over to you. Let's get started.
You know what, then what I'll do is maybe I'll show some slides just to get people acquainted with the kinds of things that are discussed in the book. And then we can stop in the middle, take some questions, and then see more slides. We'll just play it by the year. Here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if you can see the slides.
Yes, we can.
Super. Okay, so the book is called Right Between the Years, and I'll tell you in a second why it's called Right Between the Years. Here's some interesting pictures of the book. These pictures were not created by me. This is a new phenomenon that we are seeing in marketing, which is that you have all these influencers on Instagram, and many of them are book lovers. They buy your book and review it, and they post pictures of the book. So these are some pictures I got of my book from influencers that have posted it on Instagram. So I thought that was interesting. And it's a very unique way in which people are mixing personal brands and corporate brands and author brands, and all the different brands are sort of crossing over into this important channel. So I thought that was kind of cool. But here's the story behind the book, which is, why do I call it Right Between the Years? So psychologists sometimes like to point out that everything that happens about sex happens not where you might think, but between your ears. And what I like to say is actually that the where and how of everything about branding too happens right between the ears. And it's not that, when we look at billboards on the streets, it's not on the packages that we see in the stores, but everything, if you might imagine, everything ultimately goes to your brain, and it's processed right between your ears, in that sense that reality is what your brain perceives it to be. And therefore, as marketers, we have had a big push to understanding how the brain works, because now we know that everything happens there. And that's pretty intuitive. Some of the things that we're learning is that brand is sort of our perception of that full being of a product. So this is kind of a little philosophical here, right? But the whole notion is that when you look at anything, there is what you perceive, and there is something hidden. And intuitively, we all know this, right? When you meet a person, for example, just by observing them physically, you don't learn everything about them. You learn everything about them as you start interacting with them. And that is why we give this idea of a soul to a person. But brands behave very similarly. This perception that we talk about is the key that unlocks certain sensations of our past experiences and harbored fantasies. And what do I mean by that? So when you start saying that, look, everything is happening in your brain, the second question that you ask is, well, what is in your brain, right? So the only thing that's in your brain really is what's happened to you in your life, right? So all your experiences that you've had from the beginning, from the time that you were born to now, those experiences in some form or fashions are locked in your brain. They're not an exact recording, by the way. And the recording, by the way, keeps changing as more things happen to you. So those experiences are there. And then there are, of course, also the other thing that's in there is fantasies. And those are the only two things that are in your brain, your past experiences and your fantasies. So when brands are interacting with you, what we're trying to do as brand marketers is to find the keys that will unlock those sensations of past experiences and harbored fantasies. So I will give you some examples of those in just a second so that we understand this concept. And finally, the cognitive brands, which is what I call these types of brands, they're designed to work the way our brain does. And we know a lot about that today. And that's why they work so well, because they're so aligned with how our brain naturally works. So here's an ad that I'm going to just show you guys, and the notion that I want to bring here, and this is a US brand. It's actually one of these unicorn or .com brands which has recently come up. It's called the Farmer's Dog, and essentially what they do is that they ship you every week. They'll ship your dog some fresh dog food, so it is made from more natural foods and what have you. And the whole idea is to say that, look, this is more tasty and what have you. But the unique thing about this ad is, and I'm going to just get my pointer here so I can point to someone. Actually, no, let's see. So anyways, so what happens in this ad is that what they're trying to do is to unlock certain sensations in your mind. And what are those sensations? Those are the sensations in your mind in this situation are the sounds of your dog really enjoying that food. So let's watch this ad and then we'll just talk about it for a second. So, interesting thing about this ad is that there's no voiceover at all in this, right? All we're hearing is, of course, Beethoven's Symphony 7 in the background, which is kind of upbeat and so on, so that it puts you in a good mood. But the other thing that you're really seeing, I'm seeing why it's not. The other thing that you're really hearing there is the sound of these various dogs just enjoying their food. And because if you're a pet lover or if you own a dog, you kind of know what your dog sounds like when they're really enjoying their food. So that's why this thing shows up in that, and they just play that particular sound without actually ever saying anything about in a voice about what the dog is, what the food is or how tasty it is. So this is an example of how we unlock our sensations of our past experiences. I mean, all of us have these experiences. For example, I have memories of India when I grew up there and the kinds of foods that I ate there. So when I see, for example, a jodhpuri kachori or something like that, it sort of brings back that whole experience of the time that I was in India, and I would have those kinds of foods sitting on benches in the street. So it is those types of sensations that you want to unlock with the brands. So in the book, I present a model which is based around three things. One is called brand vibes. The second thing is called brand sense. And the third is brand resolve. So these are the three things that kind of make for these cognitive brands. The first question around it, and by the way, for those of you who are interested in personal brands and so on, you can apply a very similar model, although that is not what my book deals with. But nonetheless, the vibe is around establishing a connection with consumers. So does this brand give me a good vibe? Does what the brand say make sense to me? So these two questions, if they're answered, then the other question is around, will the brand make me happier? And as mentioned earlier, happiness is a very exact science in the world of psychology these days. And the reason is that, if you actually look at it and you do a Google search, you'll find there's more research going on the topic of happiness in the field of psychology than on virtually any other topic. So it's become a very exact science. So brands ultimately have to make us happy. That's kind of
Can you put it in a slideshow mode? I think the icon is back. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the icon is back. Yeah, I don't know why it went away, but anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the first piece of branding. We don't necessarily need to go into all these different pieces today, but nonetheless, the whole notion of brand vibes is around empathy and connection. So brand vibes serve to establish a deep and empathetic connection, a common chemistry between the brand and consumer. And they're kind of like an amuse-bouche to the main brand proposition. So it's just kind of the starter to the meal, if you will, but the main meal is served later. But nonetheless, it can be so powerful if you sort of, feel like you have a common chemistry with the brand, then you're more likely to believe everything else that it says. And that's the same thing we have with people, that, if you share a common chemistry with a friend, then you're more likely to believe the things that they say. So we want the same type of thing to happen with brands. This is one of my favorite examples of this is Dove, and this goes back maybe even 15 years. So 15 years back, Dove realized they were doing their new campaign, and they realized that, if you look at most of these campaigns that are on television and in print, you see all these women who are super thin, almost anorexic and so on. And these women are unrealistic. And they're beautiful, but they're unrealistic and unreachable for most people. And so what those ads were doing, for the most part, most of the beauty ads were doing, were they were making people feel worse about their bodies. And so what Dove did is that they actually went the other way. They recruited, more normal women. Some of those women were more full-bodied. Some of those women were dark. Some of those women were okay looking and so on, but they were all real women. They were the kinds of women that we would meet in our workplaces and the women that would be in our families. And they started putting those women on their billboards everywhere. And the billboards typically looked something like this. And the interesting thing about this billboard is that it doesn't actually say anything about the soap. So if you would think about branding, you would say, well, what branding is to figure out what's different about your product and then start communicating that into your brand message. But you look at this and there's no discussion of the product. They're not talking about how creamy the soap is, how clean it's going to make you, and blah, blah, blah. All those things aren't there. It's just putting these normal women there. And this campaign was so successful, not just in the United States, but this expanded to Asian countries, it expanded to Brazil and so on, and made this one of the most successful campaigns ever. So that sort of was a big learning experience for me, because I had to step back and say, hey, how do you do branding without even talking about your product? So something new was happening. And I think even in India, we've seen this particularly. I love this brand. This is Tanishq. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with it. But what Tanishq has done is that they've decided that they're going to connect with women, and they've done that in many different and very creative ways. But I'm going to show you an ad which is around their Mia brand line, which is targeted at working women. So let's take a look at this ad, and we'll see some things unique about it.
Are Facebook ads inconsistencies causing you to want to rip your hair out? How many times have you tried to scale your Facebook ads but failed?
There we go.
To those who live in their little bubble that a girl can't juggle between the office and the home because they think it'll be such a struggle. Well, it's the last thing on my mind. And how some colleagues get a kick by shooting their mouth too quick.
Hey, I got promoted.
About how I'm getting ahead just because I'm a chick. It's the last thing on my mind.
So, let's take a look at this ad. I'm not going to play the whole thing. The whole ad is about 3 minutes or something. But what you see is that the women that they're using in this ad, firstly, you notice that they're more dusky women, so that whole notion of just using fair women, light-skinned women, all of that, they put that out of the picture, and they're looking at women who look more like the kinds of women we would encounter in our workplace. You're seeing a woman, now this is a line, this is a brand that is targeted at working women. So you saw that the jewelry pieces were there when she was getting ready for work and so on. So they're kind of there in the background, but the whole notion is to connect with women on the basis of empathy, on the basis of this notion that, look, women are getting ahead because they're doing so well. They're talented and they are very good at what they do. And that is why they're getting ahead. It's not because they're women or something like that. So that sort of connection is what has driven this deep connection that women have with the Tanishq brand. And they've done it in many different ways. They've done it around weddings, as you know. They've done it around even LGBTQ issues. This particular ad here, two of a kind, always make a beautiful pair. It's a nod to the LGBTQ community. So you're seeing how brands are doing something that is very novel, that is not to be found in the marketing books that you see in your MBA schools. This whole notion of connecting with people is very important in terms of the brand having these deep and lasting connections. I'm going to skip this one just in the interest of time. This is an ad that Zomato did, which certainly they got a lot of flack for, and appropriately so. But this sort of tells you how you can go wrong in this, which is when you don't understand that these connections are important. Now, Zomato is a brand which should be making strong connections with everybody, not just men, but with women as well. But they put up an ad like this, which is absolutely offensive to mothers and sisters and so on who would be customers of theirs. And luckily they backed off from it, and good for them for doing that. But nonetheless, this is where you can go wrong in this by going in the opposite direction and establishing connections the wrong way, or earning empathy, or actually having no empathy with your customers. The second way, so I talked a lot about empathy, and I want to make a distinction between brands that make a connection with you through empathy, which is where they sort of communicate to you, I feel what you feel. That's what empathy is. I feel what you feel. The second way to do a connection with consumers through vibes is by saying that, the values that you have, the deeply held values that you have, are the same values that I have. And connecting on those values is another way that you can sort of play up a brand. Again, you're not necessarily talking about the attributes of the brand, but that connection that you form through value. So let's take a look at this ad as well, and then we'll talk about these things a bit.
मम्मी, भैया और मैं खेलने जा रहे हैं।
नहीं, आज नहीं।
क्यों?
आज तुम मुझे किचन में हेल्प करोगी।
और मम्मी?
कोई मम्मी नहीं।
क्या कर रहे हो?
रौनक, तुम चले जाओ, नीचे मिल जाएगा तुम्हें खेलने के लिए कोई, या पापा आप जाओ ना इसके साथ।
मैं भी जाऊं?
नहीं बोला ना। बेटा, घर का काम भी सीख ले, नहीं तो लोग क्या कहेंगे, माँ ने कुछ नहीं सिखाया।
So, another beautiful campaign there. And this one is by Tata Teas for their Jagore brand. And, again, this is a brand you may or may not know this, but about when there was 2007, when they launched these types of campaigns, they were a distant number 3 or 4 in the market. And by 2 years back, they were the leading brand in the market. So this type of marketing actually works really well, where you're able to make those connections with consumers. So you know what, I'm going to stop here for just a second and maybe take some questions from the audience, and then we can cover more slides if we have more time. Let me stop the share here. So the notion here, like you saw, was, are you making a connection with consumers through brand empathy? So that's a brands with empathy, or are you making a connection with consumers with brands with value? You don't have to do these things, but when you do these things and you get it right, you can have a very powerful brand. So let me stop here for a second and see if there are any questions that the audience would like to throw. Let's make this a little interactive.
I'd like to ask them, though, which brands have they kind of related to and which have connected to them either on empathy or on values? Is there any brand that comes to your mind? You say, I mean, of course, we know the Tanish one, but any other brands that you feel really connects well with you, either on an empathy or on a values basis? Airtel, Har Ek Friend Zaruri Hota Hai. That's a very nice one. Thank you, Revti. Yes, definitely remember that campaign. Very memorable. Body Shop. Okay, Mudit, tell us more. Reena, Tata Steel. We also make steel. Very nice. Amul, very nice. I think even Tata connected with us quite well, even in COVID times, just with some of the practices that they did when they said that, okay, they are going to give everybody their salaries. And Ashirwad, Maa ke haath ki roti, Apple, Surf Excel, Daag Achhe Hain, Parle G for Genuine, Swiggy, Gulab Jamun Grandparents, the Google search, Reunion 1, Paytm's Women Financial Literacy ad, Dairy Milk, Nescafe, Moments That Matter, Tata Tea, Cadbury Diwali. Yeah, that's a lovely one. I also remember that. So Shrija says Coca-Cola, Fevicol. Amita says Jabber Honey. Nikita says, is it, oh, she has a question. All right. Is it true that only successful, famous brands can use empathy techniques to connect with the consumers, as they can afford to have their product display value in the background rather than in the forefront? Hence, smaller, newer brands won't be able to use this technique.
So that's not true. So you can have smaller brands that have done really well. And in fact, in the book, I discuss a brand which is a US brand. It's called the Dollar Shave Club. This is a brand that actually was completely unknown, was failing. It was a startup company. And then their CEO put out this phenomenal ad, which he just kind of recorded himself because he had no money. So he just went to his warehouse and he just recorded this 3-minute rant about how it was ridiculous that companies like Gillette that manufacture blades are charging so much money for them and ripping men off. So he just had this rant about it, and it just went viral. They were like, he put it up, and then very soon there were like 26 million people that saw that rant because it was just so powerful and people could relate to it. And they could answer that question that, you know what, I feel what he's feeling, right? So I can feel what the brand feels, or the brand feels what I feel. And that created such a connection that went so viral that that company became an overnight success. It's worth over $1 billion now. So I do think actually it's not easy to do because, you know, you have to be genuine and authentic about this thing. You can't say to someone that I feel what you feel without being authentic about it. So in that sense, it's hard to do, but if you can find the right notes, it's very much a viable strategy for new companies. In fact, it might be more viable for new companies because sometimes it's hard to believe that those old dogs have changed their ways. If they've done all kinds of things in the past, that past lives with them.
Sheetal is asking, any tips for small business owners, especially for handmade products?
For handmade products. Look, I mean, I think particularly with handmade products and so on, and I'm just thinking aloud here, but certainly things like values could be very important because many of these products are very much linked to helping particularly our local communities, who are the people and the craftsmen that make these products. So certainly there is a notion that would be around doing a brand with values in that context. Just be careful. Brand with values are the hardest ones to do because once you state those values, you better live by them. You cannot betray those customers once they believe you have those values. So it's not just so be careful that brands with values are not just campaigns. They are an entire philosophy that company must adopt and live up to.
Sandeep, I'd like you to go a little bit deeper into that. The difference between a brand and what's a campaign, because a lot of times we focus on the campaign.
Right. And then, if we look at this specific thing, if you look at Tata's, for example, and I've mentioned, we just saw the ad on Jaguar, right? So this is all around. So they've made their whole company around, or their whole brand around awakening India, right? On these different social injustices and so on. But you cannot have a situation where one day they talk about gender issues and so on, and then next day they forget about it and move on to other issues, right? Or move on, you can move on to other issues which are similar, but you can't then tomorrow say, well, you know what, we're done with issues-based marketing and now we're moving into just doing taste, or, putting people with glamour in our ads and so on. That's not what you can do. And if you look at the Tatas right from the very beginning, when you had Jamshedji Tata, right from the right from the time that this country was independent, Jamshedji Tata has been very involved in doing philanthropic activities and helping with social injustice cause. So this is a brand that has a very deep credentials in this space, which they have lived up to for nearly a century now. So I think that is the kind of thing that you need. So just don't, with brands, brands mean something. Like I said earlier, it goes to the soul of what this thing is. And you can't change your soul from time to time. So it can't just be a campaign. It has to be something more than that stays consistent and consistently with you.
Dipti is asking, how do we apply these attributes in a B2B space? Branding for software products and services, some examples would help.
Right. I think that's a good question. It is a question that I don't address in this particular book. This book is very specifically about consumer-facing industries, right? So financial services, hotels, anything that faces consumers. But what I'd say, and I'm also asked the question sometimes about the personal branding issue. I think the power of behavioral sciences is that they explain how your brain works. So it doesn't matter what situation you are in. It doesn't matter whether it's B2B or whether it's B2C. Your brain still works in the same way. And when you're in a B2B setting, what you can use this for, the basic model around vibes, sense, and resolve, is something that you can use, particularly, I would say, in terms of your sales reps, in terms of how they interact with the customers, because a lot of the B2B selling actually happens through human sales reps who are going and talking to customers. So I think those points around establishing a connection through values or through empathy, all of those things remain important as you do B2B selling, particularly.
So Arani is asking, how do you build a brand of a school apart from focusing only on academics? Wow.
I mean, school is such a, school, I think, meets the perfect definition here. In fact, so if you look at a school, there are lots of schools. So, what is my connection? Why do I feel that this is the school which is right for my kids? I think that is a very important question. I wouldn't send my kids to a place where I didn't feel that place was right for my kids. And so in that sense, that whole connection piece is important. The brand sense piece is important, which is, so the brand sense piece, which we haven't talked about here, is about making an instinctive connection with something that feels instinctively right, or something that feels right based on deliberation, which is where you look at all the credentials and make it, pros and cons and all of those types of things. And then you say, okay, this thing makes sense. So this model of being asked to, do I feel a connection to the school? Does the school make sense for my kids? And am I going to then resolve to send my kids there? I'm going to make that commitment. I think those things are very much important for that. So the school has to think, should think beyond. I'm sure they think about their value proposition on a deliberative basis, but they should think about how they make the connections and what is the instinctively right feeling about those schools.
So Sandeep, we have a lot of questions coming, but we'll take a couple of slides and then we'll take the next set of questions.
Okay, yeah, and maybe actually that's that question that came in, and maybe that sets us up for the next part of the discussion.
Yes.
So let me share my screen again and maybe share just a few slides, and then we'll come back to more questions. I love this group because you guys have so many questions, which is great. We can just keep going for a very long time, but let's see what we can cover here. All right, you guys can see the slides back again?
Yep.
Super. So this whole notion about brand sense, and many of you might be familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work. He has written a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you guys to read this book. It's pretty much well established in the field of behavioral sciences. It's had a huge impact, but nonetheless, at a simplest level, what does it say? It basically says that when we think about the when we think about the brain is not, as we have historically thought, that, hey, there's a functional part of the brain and then there's an emotional part of the brain. That really hasn't been validated when you start actually looking at the neuroscience picture and people start using fMRIs and things like that to peer into the brain. But a model that is better explanation of how the brain actually works is that brain does things two ways. One is instinctively, and the other is deliberatively. So, he gives the examples like 2 + 2, we just kind of instinctively say 2 + 2 is 4. But if I say 17 times 24, then you have to think a lot and do some calculations, and you have to do a lot of deliberation. So deliberation involves all these processes around, doing pros and cons, doing algorithmic analyses, doing spreadsheets, and all of those types of things. Whereas here, we make decisions instinctively. And how do we do that? Because remember, we've lived an entire life. And in that entire life, we have formed all kinds of beliefs and lessons. So when we look at something that's new, if this is something that conforms to your beliefs and conforms to your lessons learned in the past, you will automatically prefer those things. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. What has been found is that, every day we make thousands of choices. 95% of those choices are done instinctively, which means they're done without thinking, and they're done with very little thought. And there's only 5% of the decisions in which we do actually this deliberation. And also, don't make the mistake of thinking that for complicated things we do this, which you might, but it's not necessarily true. And for less complicated things we do this. No, like driving, for example, is very complicated. Computers are still struggling to be able to have the artificial intelligence that makes a car a good driver by itself. We do those things instinctively. So we do many, many very complicated things, which are very hard for computers, and we do it instinctively. So when a brand's proposition makes sense by aligning with the person's existing beliefs, then you have a system one easer, or a brand proposition that makes sense to you instinctively. What has been observed is that there is a whole thing around cognitive biases, and psychologists have studied well over 100 different cognitive biases. But really, what cognitive biases are these are beliefs or these learnings that we have, which have been accumulated over generations, and therefore we believe these things. So, for example, there's something called, for example, the Occam's razor effect. So this is an effect where we believe that the simple answer is the better answer, which, by the way, is not always true. The simple answer is not always the better answer. But most times it is, and therefore you believe this thing, right? So loss aversion bias is a place where we don't like to lose what we have. So there's all kinds of beliefs in different cultures, but they essentially amount to the things like a bird in hand is better than 2 birds in the bush. And that might not actually be true, but nonetheless, that's the kind of wisdom that we have, that, hey, it's not good to be greedy, be happy with what you have. So there are all these types of biases that are there, and these can be used by marketers or leveraged by marketers to position their brands around these things. So let's take a look at this. Now, this one is around the in-group bias. So we as humans have a natural tendency to form relationships and to belong to groups. And we do that in two ways, which is when we get into certain groups, we like to be as similar as possible to those groups. So we change ourselves to be as similar as possible to those groups to fit in there better. But we also do a second thing. We also make our distance from other groups that we don't belong to higher. So we make ourselves more salient versus other groups that we don't belong to. Kind of think of it like belonging to a club, right? When you go to a club, if you belong to a certain club, then you are like those other people in the club and you kind of make yourself similar to those people in the club. But if there's another club in the city, you'd like to make yourself different from that club. So here's an ad which is around Guinness, and what you're going to see, the Guinness, this is around Guinness beer. And Guinness beer is kind of, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's a pretty global brand, but it is kind of like this black looking beer, which is kind of a little thick. It has this thick cream on it and so on. It's more bitter than normal beer. I mean, if you didn't know better, if people didn't tell you that it's beer, you might think it's something else. And so it's kind of an acquired taste. And so Guinness had this whole problem that they had this unique beer, which is, not kind of like beer. And so how to make this, how to make people like it. So they use the in-group bias, which is where they said that, look, we're a beer that's different, but we're different and we're the kind of beer that is made of more. And it's not just the beer that's made of more, it's special people that drink that beer. And those people are very different and made of more. They have special character. And you will see this ad. Excuse me a second. For some reason, my computer's battery is disconnected. I'm going to just connect that so we don't go off. All right, I'm back. And you're going to see in this ad that there are these people that are playing basketball in wheelchairs, and you might think that they're all disabled. But you will see that only actually one of them is disabled, but they're in those chairs just to be with their friend and to level the playing field with their friend. So let's take a look at that and how they've made this very special ad, which is one of my favorites.
Dedication. Loyalty.
Sweet buddy.
Friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character.
So there you go. You see, what a beautiful ad that is. It sort of shows you that here's what kind of people would actually get into a wheelchair just to level the playing field with their friend. And the answer is that people that are special, that are made of more, just like this beer, which is special and made of more. So, it's a beautiful execution of the in-group bias, which you see here. Similarly, Occam's razor, simpler answer is the better answer. This has been used by many different brands. And really what you talk about here is Staples is one of the office supply companies here, which created this easy button, and they started putting this button on everything. And their ads were, again, very beautiful. I'm not going to show all of those here, but nonetheless, they talk about how by just going to Staples, you can simplify your life and just in one place, get everything that you want to. So keeping it simple. And similarly for prepared food, when life gets crazy, keep it simple. This basic idea has been used by many different brands. Let's take a quick look at the other side of brand sense, which is around making sense through deliberation. And when you make sense through deliberation, what you're doing is there are many different methods, and I, by the way, discuss in my book each of these different methods. And these methods are actually inspired by the work that is done by cognitive behavioral therapists who work with people to change their behavior. But one of the, so you can show the value of your product. That's the amplify the value. You can show why your product is less risk. You can provide reasons to believe as to why your product is what it is, and then you can change the context. Changing the context is an interesting one. This is where you actually go to someone and say, you should look at the value of what I'm bringing to you in a very different way than you're thinking about it. So let's take a look at an example here. So this is Patek Philippe, which is one of the premium brands of watches in the world. And they have, and they've been around for more than 75 years, and they've had almost the same campaign for at least the last 50 years. But what they did is their watches cost anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, sometimes even more than that. So how do you actually have a watch which costs that much money, and then at a time when people can see time, for that matter, on their cell phones, which are going to be way more accurate than any mechanical machine can be. So from the purpose of, hey, the value is getting accurate time, that doesn't exist, right? That you can get from your cell phone for free. So why would somebody want to buy a Patek Philippe for something like $100,000? And the answer is that what they said is that you never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. And what they're saying is really that this is not really a watch at all. This is your part of your legacy. This is something that you're going to leave for your kids. This is something special that you're going to leave for your kids, and they're going to wear it, and then they're going to give it to their kids. This is something that is forever. So you suddenly go from having people look at it as an expense, which is why would I waste $100,000 on a watch, to something that says, hey, no, this is more like an investment. This is something that is actually even more than an investment, because this is going to be part of your legacy. So very clever in terms of how they did that. De Beers did the same thing. If you know diamonds, then you also know that diamonds are actually not particularly rare in nature. But they have certain sort of special attributes, and they were never a part of, in the United States, they were never a part of being, for example, a symbol for your engagement or for your wedding. That was all done by De Beers through campaigns. So they sort of made this solitaire diamond the one moment in your life, so they had a whole campaign around, this is diamond has special attributes, it's hard, it lasts forever, and so on. And isn't that something that you would subconsciously want your engagement and your relationship with your significant other to be? And therefore, that is where it became the symbol, and the way that, it's like indispensable. You can't have an engagement or a marriage anymore without having a solitaire. But then, they own 80% of the market. So then you say, well, how do you grow your business if you already own 80% of the market? Well, you grow the market. And that's what you see in this. So then they had another campaign, which was around the past, present, and future, which had 3 diamonds, as you might imagine. And then they had another campaign, which is around eternity, that it is for eternity, it is forever. And that's a ring with diamonds going all around. And then finally, they said, when you run out of the left hand, then you can move over to the right hand. And they had a campaign which was around the right hand is about me, or women of the world, raise your right hand. And that is about saying to women that you don't need to wait for a man to buy you a diamond. You are, successful, you're working and what have you, and you can buy a diamond for yourself. So the right hand becomes about you. So this was the campaign which said, the right hand, raise women of the world. Let me see where it is. Women of the world, raise your right hand. So this was another campaign. So they've been very clever about being able to use the reframing method to continually grow their market, even when they own the whole market, so to speak. So I'm going to just stop there for a second, because I'm sure you guys have more questions, judging by the last round, and then we'll see if we have time left for more.
Yes, I am asking them to unmute. Neha, go ahead. Then Vindhya, Amita, Rashmi, Rohit. Go ahead, Neha.
Yeah, hi, good evening. I just want to understand about, it's very, very interesting to know about brands. But specifically, if I talk about marketing, in a commoditized world where, it is highly price sensitive. So how do you drive brand marketing, in a category which is low involved with consumers, and there is no tangible benefit as such? So how do you make your product or brand stand out or out of that clutter?
Yeah, I mean, I think and I would say that the existence of brands is for that particular situation, which is you want to add value beyond the commodity. And if you look at some of the examples that we've been talking about, so tea could easily be a commodity, right? I mean, it's coming from the same darn gardens in Assam, right? Darjeeling tea is coming from Darjeeling, and that's all there is to it. And so it could very easily be something that you would sell in large sacks as it is sold in wholesale. But really, what the brands have been able to do is to make it be something that is more than just a sack full of tea, by actually giving it those intangible attributes, as we saw in this case, Jagore, or whatever else you want to put as attributes. So in that sense, it is. Now, your second part of your question is, gee, but maybe you're talking about tea that is pretty high involvement because people are drinking it every day and everybody has an opinion on it and so forth. So what do you do about low involvement products? But I think the point is that you have to sort of reach deep into what are those insights that you have, be those around empathy, be those around value, be those around brand sense, to kind of create some kind of added attribute to this thing. So, if you looked at, like I was saying, if you look at even watches and all these things have been commoditized, right? I mean, when these digital watches came out long back, you could get very cheap watches. But if you want to stand aside and something, you have to associate with one of these instinctive pieces, or one of these empathy type of connections that you establish with the brand. So that is, I would encourage you to look very deeply into what is this extra envelope of soul that you could add to whatever it is, the product that you have.
Sure. Thank you.
Go ahead, Amita. I would
hi.
A lot of questions.
So thank you.
Please keep the questions to point so we can take as many as possible.
Sure.
Go ahead, Amita.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Sukriti, for this opportunity. I have a question here. People go deep into branding of any product in an advertisement, but is that important for B2B marketing and to become successful in this regard? Or how are the values connected with targeting the consumer?
So as I was mentioning, Amita, that at the end of the day, B2B, you're also still dealing with people. The people that are making the decisions there are still people. So I think the value of connecting with them, trying to appeal to certain beliefs they might have around what works, what doesn't work, those things are still valid. But nonetheless, in B2B, that deliberative decision making is going to become very important. People are going to look at ROIs, people are going to look at spreadsheets, people are going to look at pros and cons. So you need to combine both that element of providing solid value, but then wrapping it with making that connection with the decision makers and influencers.
Thank you.
Sanjana, go ahead.
Hi, Sandeep sir.
Go ahead,
Hello.
Sanjana. We can hear you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Sandeep sir. My name is Sanjana. I have a plus size brand called as Tribish. So I have just started it like last week. My question for you is this, sir, that should I create a plus size community to sell my clothes, or I should just be branding around my brand, sir? People are getting confused with the plus size community, whether I'm a socialist woman, I'm running a plus size community, or I am a businesswoman running the clothing business. So how should I go about that, sir?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and it has become a bit of a it's become a bit of a controversy here also, because when you start demarcating plus size women as something that is unusual, then you're kind of, is that a negative or is that a positive? It is a positive in the sense that you are saying that, look, I understand that you have different kinds of bodies and you have different kinds of needs, and we're taking care of that. Here in the US, most recently, what some of the brands have done is that they've actually eliminated this whole plus size category because they didn't want people to feel like they were unusual or different. So now plus size is a part of the whole, all the sizes that are offered in any product. But Also, one of the things that was bothering people in the United States, and I can speak to the US, one of the things that was bothering people were that, particularly for women, that plus size products for women were more expensive than plus size products for men, right? So whereas for men, plus size products were the same price as regular products, here for women, it wasn't the case. So people were feeling like, geez, you're kind of distinguishing again, you're sort of discriminating against us. So I do think that is a balance that Sanjana, you will have to take a look at. How much of this you want to make sure that you're communicating the message around G. We are addressing the special needs that you might have, at the same time not sort of being seen as taking advantage of it, as people have done in the pricing space.
Thank you so much, sir.
Shashwati, go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, good evening, Sandeep sir. Good evening, ma'am. Yeah, my question is, what is the one indispensable attribute of any brand, irrespective of the size, whether it is small, big, costly, cheap, expensive, whatever it is, what is the one indispensable, intangible attribute that can become the center stage for making the brand successful?
So, of the various things that I talk about, I would say the one thing that is most likely to work for brands is to find a deep belief that consumers have and align your brand to that. So for example, when I talk to medical brands and so forth, as I was doing a few days back, people have different beliefs. So for example, people believe things like, less medicine is the best medicine, for example, jitni dawai kam se kam khana hai, right? That type of thing. That may or may not be true, but people believe these types of things. So when people have certain deep beliefs, the best thing you can do is to align your brand with that. So even if you are a medicine and people believe that less medicine is the best medicine, you should talk about how your medicine is actually very less medicine, right? So you have to, get yourself inside the heads of people, and in whatever category that you are in, Shashwati, understand what are the underlying beliefs people have, because you can't change those beliefs. They have them from a lifetime of experiences, and it's hard for them to change. So get into that. That's what System 1 thinking is all about.
Windya is asking, oh, sorry, go ahead, Shashwati. Did you?
Yeah. So it is the core for connecting with the customer, if we say so. The beliefs are the core things, the core attribute for connecting with the customer, if we are talking about the intangible attribute.
So there isn't just one answer. And I think that, there is a natural desire in us as humans to believe that there's got to be some kind of an open sesame type of magic word that'll open the whole world for us. Mm-hmm. But it can be in many different ways. But if you were looking for the most likely and feasible way to do it, I would go after beliefs, or the System 1 thinking, which I cover extensively in the book, by the way.
Okay. Thank you so much. Can you please give the link for your book? Share the link for your book. So
it's on Amazon. It's called Right Between the Years. So, and maybe we'll put it up in the chat box. It kind of looks like this.
Okay. Right Between the Years. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for answering my question so wonderfully. Thank you.
Windya is asking, do you have any tips on building a brand on artwork, which is kind of abstract? How do we put empathy and values connection with the targeted customer?
In artwork? Artwork is something, for me personally, is something that always needs to have some soul. We can look at two pieces of paintings, we can look at two different statues, and you can say, this one has it and this one doesn't have it, right? We always say that. In Hindi, there's a great phrase that we have, which we use commonly, which I have trouble explaining to people here in the US, which is, where we say, is cheez mein wo baat nahi hai. And it's kind of like it doesn't have that thing. So I do think you must, in art forms, I don't know which particular art we're talking about here, whether it's jewelry or whether it's whatever. I think you need to figure out what is that special soul that your art is going to be about. And then you have to stick to that particular soul and make sure that that is reflected in all the art that you do. But there can be many, many different forms of those connections. But I think art without soul is not going to be art at all.
And the last question we'll take from Rashmi. Rashmi, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. Good evening, both of you. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, Rashmi.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Shortly, I'm planning to open my clinic. So, how should I advertise it? Is it necessary, and how much it is necessary for Indian community to advertise and all?
Yeah. So, I mean, as we were discussing earlier, people have very strong beliefs about their health. Like natural is better. Or gee, the best treatment that you can get is at home, don't go to hospital. There are all these types of different beliefs that people have. So Rashmi, you have to sort of think about what is it that you're going to be, what are the beliefs that you're going to align to, and of which of the particular consumers that you want. So for example, do you want to offer integrated medicine, that this is something that you'll go to Ayurvedic if Ayurvedic is needed, you'll go to modern medicine if modern medicine is needed, but you're going to do what is the best. So I think be clear about what is it, who is it that you're going after, and what are the belief systems that those people have that you want to tap into, and then stick to it.
Okay. Thank you so
Last
much.
question from Kushali. How can a brand revamp its core values and adapt to the time efficiently? From the contest of Fair and Lovely moving to Glow and Lovely, Victoria's Secret's creating a VS collective of gender advocates, empowering women rather than conventional way of VS functional.
Yeah, and Victoria's Secret is a great example of a brand that destroyed itself by not being able to keep up with the times, right? So I think we have a fast-moving world, and people's views of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate changes. And like I just said earlier, that plus size brands are now looking at whether they should have been pricing more and discriminating against women that are full-bodied. And so I think you're right to point out that you have to keep in touch with the vibes of the day, so to speak. Not that you want to be jumping from one thing to the other on a daily basis, but there are certain fundamental changes that are taking place, and you don't want to be anachronistic. You want to be aligning your brand smoothly through those changes.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandeep. I think that was excellent. I think at least I got some understanding. Any closing thoughts before we end our session for today?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we scratched the surface. I mean, we could keep talking about this thing for the next couple of hours, but there are a lot of interesting things. I think the kinds of questions that many people are asking are covered in the book. So I'll just hold up the book so you guys can, for those of you who didn't see the link or something, that you can see it here. There you go. And I do have one request for the audience, that for those of you who do read the book, please go to Amazon and also give it a rating, whether it's good or bad. That's up to you based on your assessment, but please do take the time to say something about it.
Well, thank you, Sandeep. I think a lot of us learned a lot, and now we have to learn how to connect a little bit better with our customers. So thank you for that. I will be sending out a survey to all of you. So please do let us know how you like this session. And with that, I wish you all a good night, and we'll see you back soon.
Thank you.